So today we're going to be analysing another track. The track we're going to be looking at today is called If You Need It by Sammy Virji. You probably will have heard some of his other songs in DJ sets, and he's been really pioneering the resurgence of garage music, or at least electronic music with a lot of garage elements. This is one of his most recent releases at the time of recording. It's a little bit different to his usual stuff, but I did want to break it down, go into the individual elements and work out exactly why it works. So the tempo here is at 132 beats per minute, which is a little bit low for the usual two-step garage tempo range. But the main reason because of that is probably down to the drum beat, and in particular the kick pattern. I'm mainly going to be focusing on the drums and the main chord, bass and melody that you can hear. But let's start by looking at the drums then. So first of all, the drum pattern here. Not a super complicated drum pattern, and it's again slightly different to the usual garage two-step vibe that Sammy normally produces. The main thing in particular about this drum beat is that we have a kick drum on every single beat of our pattern, whereas usually a garage track would eliminate the kick drum underneath the claps and shuffle the beat around with the other kick drums. We've got a kick drum on every beat. We've got a clap and a layered snare. It's more of a sound design thing, but we've got our main clap or snare on our second and fourth beats. We have a pretty standard open hi-hat on the off beat. And then there are some slight additions here and there. A additional perk hit that's chucked in on the 16th notes within the drum beat. And then we do also have an extra clap layer up here that only plays once every 2 bars. Well, there's not really a lot going on in the drum beat, but one of the biggest things about this genre is down to something called swing. Over here in Ableton, we have our groove section for each individual clip. I've set the swing on at the moment, but have a listen to what happens when I turn this off. If you can, focus in on this percussive sound here. Now, to visually show you what's actually happening here, I can hit this commit button to apply the groove to my drum beat. You can see they're moved very slightly off the grid there. And this is what's creating that two-step, that skippy feel. And the swing setting that we've got it on here is 16th notes and 63. But that's the drum beat for the first 4 bars, and that continues pretty much throughout the whole track. There is just slight change though in the second section here. If I just solo this loop. And it's just this short skippy, it could be a break as well. It could be like a sample break chopped up and rearranged, but there's just a slight change with these kind of lasery sounding percussion sounds hidden in the background. And from bar 9 in this sequence, it plays just this short section here, and then the full loop comes in afterwards. The key thing that's really important with this when you're in Ableton is just to make sure that you apply the groove to the audio file as well. This just makes sure that the swing that you've got set in your drum loop is also applied to the audio loop, and it will quantize and time stretch to make sure all those beats are in time. You can find the swing feature in a few different places inside of Logic. There's one inside the piano roll editor on the left-hand side. There's also another one inside the pattern region, which is just hidden away in the inspector view within the pattern region itself. But for now, let's move on to the second most important part of this track. Let's just have a listen to the chords. Now in this song, there are 2 really distinct sections, 2 different bass lines, 2 different chord sequences. But one happens at the beginning of the song when the drums first come in. And then there's another section, which is the kind of chorus, let's say, of the song, which happens around 16 bars later. And that is this. and then it goes back to the first clip again. So it's relatively simple, but the actual structuring of the song makes it interesting how it switches quite dramatically about halfway through the song, which isn't very common. Normally you'd probably get something more akin to this over here. Playing pretty much throughout the whole song with some slight changes in the melodies and some of the notes in the chords above as well. So let's talk about the key. If we were to look at the first MIDI region here, we can see we've got this top note here that plays for the whole 4-bar section. Very slightly changes at the end there. And that note there is our B flat or A sharp. In the lower half, we have our bass note, and that goes from a D sharp up to an F sharp. Now trying to work out the key of this, we can see that this note here, if we were to move them a little bit closer together, they are 7 semitones apart. And if we were to move a note up to the third, we could therefore assume that the track is in D sharp minor. And usually when you listen to a song, the first chord or bass note in the song will generally be the root of the key that you are listening to, and then you just need to work out whether it's major or minor. So what I'll do is I'll go into the scale and set it to D sharp minor. You'll notice that final note is actually out of the scale of D sharp minor. Now what's going on here is if we listen to the sequence again, you might be able to pick up on how that first chord has a lot of tension in the chord, and the second one does slightly resolve the chord sequence. But if we play this section over here, which is the first half leading into the second half, you might hear how this first chord within that second half section has a much more stable feel than those other two chords. The bass note we have is an A sharp, and the top note is also an A sharp. And if we put in our scale over here, we put in A sharp minor, you'll see all of the notes fit. And if we go back to our first clip here too, you'll see now that note, that final note, is now also in that A sharp minor scale. So it's slightly tricking us into thinking that the key of the song is slightly different when it's playing this section at the beginning, just because of that bass note, that low D sharp. This A sharp plays throughout the whole sequence, pretty much throughout the whole song. And that's really helping center the key of the track to be A sharp something. Just happens to be, of course, A sharp minor as well. And if we were to use this first note as our root note of a key, then we'd actually be in D sharp Dorian, which is closely related to our regular minor key. And the D sharp Dorian scale just has a sharpened sixth note in comparison to D sharp minor. In D sharp minor, we should have something like this. And this is D sharp Dorian. So this top note always remains on the A sharp up here. The first chord that we had is our root note of the chord, which is D sharp, and then the A acts as our perfect fifth above it. The A sharp stays where it is, and the bass note moves up to F sharp, and that becomes our major third because it's 4 semitones apart. So this A sharp just remaining on the top is a common theme. The note underneath is changing the relationship between the two. If we go over to the second section, we start out with 2 A sharps, an octave difference between them. Then we move on to the G sharp. And this now becomes our minor second interval. Going down another step, we go to the major third interval. And then we drop all the way down to the first chord in the song, actually. This goes back to our perfect fifth. Having that second section come in just really lifts the song. But I always think of it as like not giving everything away, having something quite repetitive and not harmonically complex at the beginning, so that when you do bring the interesting part in later on, it's going to really lift and boost the track. So one of the main reasons why this chord bass pattern is so interesting is down to the rhythm. The rhythm itself uses these dotted notes. And this would be a dotted eighth note, which just means it is an eighth note plus a half of itself, which would be a 16th. So an eighth plus a 16th, that's a dotted eighth note there, 1.5 of itself. It makes up 3 16th note spaces. When you copy the notes end on end after this, it creates this syncopated rhythm. If we play this with the drums, you get this rotating rhythmic effect. If we look at the first note, this lands on the first beat of our first bar, but then because it's only 3 16th notes in length, the next note plays 1 16th note before the second beat. The next note then plays 2 16th notes before the next beat, and then 3, and then eventually it will line back up on beat number 4, but then it just repeats that cycle over and over and over again. Now this can sound quite disorientating, and one of the most popular examples of this being used is in the song by Camel Fat called Cola. In the background of that song there's this kind of percussive beep sound, and it has this syncopated rhythm, but it just continues on going around and around. And I feel like it gives you this slightly uneasy, like spinning feel to the rhythm. Whereas what a lot of other tracks do eventually is they'll cut one of those dotted notes short to bring the rhythm back into a more stable time. This is what Sammy Virji did in this song. That syncopated rhythm lasts all the way till the end of bar 2. And at the end of bar 2, the note is cut short and the pattern starts again on bar 3. Just as an example, let's just keep that syncopated rhythm going. I'll do the same with the bass too. You can also create other syncopated note lengths by either working out dotted note lengths like a dotted eighth note or a quarter note. An easy way to do this is if we just create a note, all I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure that the length of the note is an odd number. So it could either be 3, 5, 7, or 9 16th notes in length. So if I choose 5, and I'll just copy that out. And then I could put another one at the top here, and I'll set this to be 7. Is that 7? That's 7. What this also does as well when we come to the second chord section is the next set of chords actually come in just before the next kick drum. Which helps emphasize those notes and that skippy feel. I have also got the swing on within this chord section here. If I turn this off, just sounds ever so slightly jarring. It sounds a lot more like 2 layers. Now, in the kind of chorus-y part of the song where the chords change, we do also get this extra vocal drone. It's playing a very similar role to that top note within our chord sequence there, but this note is an F. And if we bring that back into our chord over here, it might be a little confusing when you pick a certain chord within Ableton. You might be thinking F's not in this key of A sharp minor, but E sharp is actually F. If you look on an actual MIDI keyboard, the note of E doesn't actually have a sharp black key above it. E sharp is actually technically F. So it's going to create a perfect fifth interval between that A sharp 2 and our E sharp as well, which also helps cement the root of our track. So moving on, there is this extra melody that I can hear in the background, in the build up to that chorus. It's very light. There may even be more notes than this. It kind of just does these 3 notes. I don't know if it's even maybe accidentally left in, but when you listen to it with the chords, it does still work. It's very, very quiet, this one, so to be honest, I'm not even going to go through it. And then finally, we of course need to talk about the vocal melody. I think one of the parts should be copied over slightly different, but the notes in the melody itself are all correct. I'm not actually sure whether it is a sample or not. It does kind of sound like a vocal sample. It doesn't sound like a chopped up vocal sample in this section, even when it moves down an octave, but it could be like a high quality a cappella from Splice or something like this, but it's very repetitive overall, and the only big difference is when it drops down to the octave below. And let's just have a listen first of all. Looking at the notes, if we go into our key of A sharp minor, they are all within that key. They are also all within the minor pentatonic key too, which again is a great scale to use if you're writing melodies, especially vocal melodies. This vocal melody, just like the top note of our chords, is going to change quite a lot between our notes. In terms of the intervals that are being used for the chords, this is playing the 7th. Okay, when looking back through this part of the video, I realised that I left the scale in Ableton in A sharp minor pentatonic. So all the intervals that I read out were completely incorrect. So let's now look through this vocal melody properly. So in relation to our first chord section, we've got our D sharp and our F sharp as our 2 chords. And so these first 2 notes here, our D sharp and our E4, these are a minor second interval apart, just an octave above. Then we go down to the minor 7th, 10 semitones apart. Then we have an octave, and then finally we have our perfect 5th. We go back to the minor 7th, the octave, and then back up to that minor 2nd at the top there. So overall, like a 50-50 balance on tense and stable intervals there. The minor 2nd and the minor 7th are quite unstable, but the octave and the perfect 5th are the 2 most stable intervals. And then exactly the same notes, but when we move to the F sharp, we end up with a major 7th interval there, which is 11 semitones, perfect 5th, major 6th, which is 9 semitones, and then a major 3rd as well. And then it goes back up to our perfect 5th, and then back up to the major 6th as well. And this one sounds a little bit more relaxed in comparison if I was to play the chords as well. The vocal melody itself goes from this high position, then it has 2 short versions of it, which are just slightly different phrases, and then it drops down an octave, and this is all happening with the exact same chords above it. But I also wanted to show off the melody in the main chorus section. And when it's in the main chorus section, we have our chord down here as the A, and I'm only going to talk about this first chord. Our first chord is the A sharp. So if we're comparing our A sharp chord here to our melody, we start out with a perfect 5th interval. Then we go down to our minor 3rd, our perfect 4th interval after that, and then it drops down to the actual root note of A sharp there. Back up to the minor 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, and all those intervals are generally the most stable intervals within the scale itself. The minor 3rd is probably the most unstable out of all of those. So you can tell this melody was written with this A sharp minor key in mind. It's just a case of the relationships changing as it moves from note to note, but the actual melody itself is the same. Everything around it is reharmonizing it and changing how it sounds. So overall, there are some interesting things about this song. The main thing for me is that change between our first section and then the second section in the chorus. It does just really lift the track. But as with this genre, the melodic elements aren't necessarily as important as other things like our drums providing the main groove, because this is a track that's designed to really be played in a club. It's meant to be danced to. But the other aspect of this is the sound design being a little bit more important, and this can actually enhance the composition without having to throw more melodies, chords and things like that.